Now you look more relaxed, as I said. Just chill out. I'm not going to have a lot of code, so a lot of you don't know me. You might have seen me around on Twitter or something. I actually am an independent consultant. I do. Can you hear something?
A bit. Does that sound better? Yes. So I'm an independent consultant. I mostly work more in the process space nowadays than the technical space. But I do a bit of everything and I still keep my fingers in it. So, unlike many of you, I don't cut code on a daily basis anymore. But what I actually wanted to show you is a little library, which to some extent comes from 2 points. One, we wanted to solve some problems. But last year at Groovy and Gradle's exchange, we talked about the lack of lots of libraries that you actually can find for Groovy. You find lots of useful libraries in Gradle and useful plugins for Gradle, etc. There's sometimes you want to use some of the code and it's not available. And we started looking for some of those and actually found a very short list. So today is one of these. It actually starts as a simple little library you can use in Groovy. And it's actually, I'm going to show you the Gradle plugin for it as well. And we can talk about more plugins, but basically building one thing on top of another. So if you want to talk to me, you can find me on Twitter. And if you pretty much Google for YSB33R, you will always get me, some other form. For some reason, in all of the internet, it still seems to be very, very unique. Anyway, so you've come out to look at the Groovy VFS, and that's it in short. That's all you have to do. So if you come from the short version of the presentation, you can go now.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Oh, but you want to see more then, I guess. Right. This is as simple as possible. Now, this is important because earlier in this conference, somebody said who was actually in this room is DSLs are hard to write, and you have they normally either have to be intuitive or easy to use. So I'll let him be the judge of that in the end. Also, a certain very, very well-known gentleman in this room said, I actually gave a presentation yesterday about making your Java APIs groovier. So I hope this is an example of that. The old Groovy VFS is really based upon Apache VFS. So all of the hard lifting is done in there. What I've done is just put a simple DSL on top of them to actually make it useful. Because writing a lot of code, if you do a lot of boilerplate code, Apache VFS is hard work. And if you're actually used to doing stuff like writing stuff that talks to FTP servers or web servers, etc., or talk to another SSH server, you know there's also a lot of boilerplate code involved. So I hope we can actually show you this is something that you can maybe use and at least give me some feedback. So, it's all on GitHub. There is actually a wiki for it with some documentation. You can find the packages on BinTray nowadays, and all you have to do is, as long as you use Groovy, something already pulls JCenter, you can pull it automatically. The Gradle packages are there as well. It's released under the Apache 2 license, and if you want to talk about it on Twitter, just use Groovy VFS as the hashtag. So, how do you start? Pretty much easy. If you want to run a Greach the standard Greach layout, all you need to pull in one simple grab. Now, it is very modular. Depending on which kind of protocols you want to use, you have to pull in extra libraries, which it uses underneath. It's pretty much the same kind of approach that Apache VFS does. So you only pull in what you need. So instead of you deciding I want to use Groovy VFS and pulls lots of libraries in for protocols you don't need, it doesn't do it. So you have to manually add them, because if you run them and suddenly your SFTP connection doesn't work, it might be because you didn't pull in the appropriate jar. And all you have to really import is one single object, and that's it. So, let's see what you can do with it. We're assuming that we've created an object called VFS, and it's there. So, lots of things based upon closures. I want to go to a remote server, an FTP server, I need to create a directory on it. How many lines of Java is that? Okay, that's all you need to do. Now, another thing you will notice, we also talk about, not having nasty surprises or unexpected kind of code. So, tend to follow the convention here of what like Unix and Linux is. So it's just like MITR, and you'll see a lot of other things follow the same kind of thing, CP, MV. So hopefully if you use a Mac at least, you know some of these things. If you come from a Windows background, well, some of the things should still be familiar. But that can be as simple as this: create a directory on a remote server. And what you now can do is I want to do a listing of that server, and all you have to say is ls, give it a URL, and then all of the output just goes to a closure. And I can do something with that. Okay, just print off the name. Now, the object that really comes back inside a closure is a VFS file object, so you'll have to go read a bit of the documentation to do a bit more with it. But it's still a lot easier than what you would have done otherwise. Okay. Right, now, there's a lot of schemas that you can actually use, and then obviously you've seen the FTP example. There's also HTTP, there's SFTP, you can look inside jars, you can look inside zip files, tar files, even if they are compressed as well. So all of that actually, the heavy lifting is already done by Apache VFS, so you can make use of that. But now you're going to start working with the server, and you look at this first FTP example, and you say, oh, well, it works nicely on my machine, and I start connecting to another machine in the company, and it doesn't work. And then you go out and discover there's a firewall on the way. And you need passive FTP. So how do you do it? There's multiple ways we can do this actually. Now one of the ways is we can actually go on a per protocol basis and create global settings for it. So I can say I want to use passive mode for FTP. And then you can add lots of other things. Now all of these are once again based upon the power of Groovy. In reality, for instance, in Apache VFS, on the FTP object, there will be something that says set passive mode. So we use all the kind of conventions that we use by dropping the first capitals, getting rid of the getters and setters. So all those things really just become names inside your DSL. And you can do it, you can add multiples of these in here. And what it really means from this point onwards, any operations you do will actually have these defaults. So further down, you can actually go and change them again if you want. But that's not the only way of actually doing this, but let's just see what you can do with this. There's another way. I can decide, hold on, I don't want to set it globally, I just want to do it per instance. So I can actually go and put a query string on the URL. So what will happen is we actually take that part out, it actually gets removed from the query string completely in case you have other query options in it. It always has to be in this format, VFS dot whatever the schema is, and then the setting. So if we, in the previous one, where we had passive mode is true, I can still do the same kind of thing in there. Passive mode is 1, still sets it to true. And if you run it, if you actually do the trace, it sets it to passive mode. So you have these two kind of options. The useful thing about this is if you want to build something that has to take a lot of URLs as part of your configuration, you want to write a command line utility, and you just need to change one thing very quickly, you don't have to write code for it, you just pass it in as part of the URL. Yeah, but you can also, when you actually create an object, there's lots of things you can pass into the VFS object initially when you create it. And you can actually use multiple of these VFS objects if you want, because you can't actually share them between threads. That's why. So if you're going to use multiple VFS object per instance. But once again, you can just put all of these things in the initial thing. And typically in Groovy style, we just use properties from a map, put them in a string, and there you go. It also works. And notice one protocol, second protocol, and you can put lots in there. Okay. Now, there are lots of the options you might think, where's the documentation for it? So I've gone through the trouble actually of taking the things out of Apache VFS, and it's actually documented, so if you want to go and have a look, you can actually find all the options that are available. We'll also tell you the options that are not supported, because there's one or two very complex options, which is very hard to do. And if nobody asks for them, I'm not going to do them either. So that pretty much is that. Now, before we move on, any questions? None. Okay, so it was nice to list files, make directives, but it's about the time I actually want to copy a file. So how do I do this? We saw the example earlier, but we can get a bit more crafty with this. We have copy operations, move operations, and it is really just as simple as that. Put the URLs in there, and we'll get to other ways of looking at local files, but that's one way of looking at using a local file. You can see the second one, I just effectively go off and copy it from one FTP server, push it off to an SFTP server over there, and that's done. And if you run into little issues, my server is different, configured differently, you'll probably find there is a configuration option you can pass in that URL. Now, there's a lot of things you can do with the copy. So the DSL just gives you a couple of other things you can add. You already saw the things you could put inside the URL itself, but there's other things I might want to do. So obviously, if you do a copy on the command line, you know it will typically prompt you, should I overwrite a file or not? But we've added the same functionality in there. So you have an option where you can actually set it to automatically overwrite or not. The override doesn't have to be a Boolean. It can actually be a closure, and I'll show you an example, because then you can do interactive copies. Now the second one is one of those nasty things that you discover when you work with code. Apache VFS has one of these unexpected behaviors. It doesn't actually check what the target is you're copying to. So you could copy where your source is a file, your destination is a directory. It will delete a directory and put a file in place. Right. That is not very funny, that if you play with it in your own machine and you suddenly deleted your whole source tree, including your Git repository. So, that's why actually, that's not the kind of behavior I would want to see in Groovy VFS. So, it's not on by default, but for some reason you really want that kind of behavior, you have to say smashes through. Maybe there's some reason sometimes you might want to do it. Well, you might want to replace a directory with a file, then it is useful, but not by default. And obviously, the standard kind of thing, as you would expect from a Unix copy, it's not recursive by default, so you have to tell it where you want to have it recursive. And then we can get into filters, because you can decide what kind of files do I want to copy, etc. So we'll look at that. So, an interactive copy first is, as I said, it can be a closure. So this is a simple kind of thing. It always gets past the from URL and the to URL. You can then decide what to do with it. So a very simple kind of thing. If you actually want to have an interactive copy on a command line, it can be something simple as that. And all it has to do is return something that resolves to a Boolean. So it just makes it really useful for me not have to write anything. And if you want to write a nice little graphic tool that needs this, then you can just put it part in. The move DSL is pretty much the same, except it doesn't have the filter on it, but it does have intermediates, which is once again the same as with Unix move. There is a -- parents option on it. Means if I want to move from one directory to another one, but all of the intermediate directories doesn't exist, I want the option to potentially create it. And you can then just apply that or not. But otherwise it's all going the same. And pretty much anything else you want to do is go and find out all of these options and how they actually behave, depending on the combinations, are all actually documented in the wiki. Okay, now a lot of times you actually have this like remote file that, or a remote archive, and you have to download and then unpack it and things like that. A very simple thing you can actually do, this is lovely, you can actually start putting schemas together. So what I can do in one line is to actually copy this from the remote server and unpack it locally. Nothing more to it. Now I want to say there is a warning with this. If you have very, very large archive, there is a performance bug in Apache VFS and it slows down. It goes like very, very fast and then it's just like a dog. It takes over. So if you know you're going to work with large files, that doesn't work. You'll have to copy it down first and then unpack it with a second operation. But we've actually used this very, very successfully copying things down from Jenkins and unpacking at the same time. So we didn't have to do multiple operations, which we're starting to get rid of a lot of the kind of steps you would normally have to put into Jenkins if you just actually put this in as a Groovy step. And we actually also use this a lot inside Gradle builds now. But we'll get to the Gradle plugin, which actually makes it easier for you. Now, this actually comes from a discussion we had on the mailing list. And somebody was asking, how do I find the MD5 on a remote server? So somebody might remember this from the Groovy user list. And I actually thought this is a good chance to actually brag about how good it is. So pretty much it is actually that. It actually uses a little thing, what's called cat, which actually allows you to pull something down and then work with the content. Now obviously, whilst bragging with it, I suddenly discovered a bug in that code, and I had to quickly fix it before the conference, and that's why we now have a version 0.5 instead of 0.4. But anyway, all the cat does for you is it gives you a stream to work with, and then you can actually work with the content. So this is pretty much the code: is pull the file from a remote server, calculate the MD5 and print it. Now, I can ask, so how many lines of normal Groovy would that be without a plugin? Or how many lines of Java is that? The other question is this readable? Do you think it's not readable? Okay, I like that. Or you're just asleep. Okay, but I actually like that example because I thought it was pretty neat and very quick to write compared to anything else. I actually would still like to have another thing where you can actually just pipe these things through an MD5 object, but we haven't got there yet. Okay, local files. So on local files, you can always prefix it with the file kind of / schema if you want. But lots of times you don't want to bother with that because it's actually a pain to work with. Because I can never remember when you work with like POSIX file systems and you work with Windows file systems where you can put all of the different characters in at the beginning. So you can always just work with a file instance. So instead of putting the URL, you can just say put a file object in there and that would work. Or you can use something directly from Apache, the file object, and that will actually work. It all just works transparently. The system will figure it out. And obviously, if you just use something, a new file, you can't apply options directly onto it. But you really actually have to do that anyway. And we use this quite a lot, especially when copying files around. But the other thing it doesn't have direct support for is Java NIO. So if you want to have a Java NIO path object, you have to use the do file to get it back in here. Right, I thought this is going to come up when you're asking. So it's fine to copy files down from somewhere, but typically servers have passwords on them. So how can you do this? There are normal ways you can actually embed it in a normal way. And sometimes someone is going to say, oh, but that's not secure. Whether it's secure or not, you can still do it. I mean, it's sometimes very, very useful. Apache VFS does actually allow you something else with the encrypt object, is to actually encrypt the password, which you can then still store as safe. That makes it a bit more secure, but not that much, because obviously if you can find an encrypt utility from code, you can still decrypt it. But it makes it a lot better to at least still store the configuration file that way, or pass on a command line. So you can do that. Theoretically, that structure is not a valid URL, so we actually handle the code to take it out and validate the URL, then put it back before passing to Apache. So it still makes it very simple, especially if, for instance, if somebody wants to write a command line utility, just pass things in like that, you can quickly do that. Now, there's an open issue to create a better way of handling this in the DSL, because currently if you want to be more secure, you have to dig straight down into Apache itself and actually write all of the boilerplate code to do that. It's not that much code, but it will still look much better if you write it in the DSL. Now, that is pretty much the DSL itself. The question I'll actually probably ask yourself, with all of that, is that actually, do you think that DSL is actually, easy to use?
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
I will say
Okay. Do you think it's intuitive? It's different. Yeah, it's good. Sorry?
It's a little bit too intuitive because of the security things.
Okay, yeah, right. Okay, good. So that was basically the initial one that was written. It solved the problems at the time. And I mean, from where I came from at that time, we had done a lot of things with copying files around, and we just got tired of doing that. So this is the reason why it was born. But if we look forward, what can we actually do with it? The first thing is obviously Java 7 brought NIO, and it brought a whole Java NIO file library. The question, do we want to go that way? Which is a question, should I wait for Apache VFS to go that way one day? Because they are still struggling to get version 2.1 out with a couple of bug fixes. And the amount of development of those libraries is very, very slow. So don't know when it will actually happen. But to go say Apache VFS have done a lot of the work that's actually in NIO. And NIO today, although it has all of the theoretically infrastructure to do it, it doesn't actually have anything besides handling files. There's one example that comes with Java examples, which is how to do zip, but nothing else. So it is still hard work to actually figure out how to do this. But that's one way we can actually look, because it might actually open up. Obviously we can decide stuff, leave Apache VFS behind it and then do everything in Groovy, but there's a lot of knowledge that's embedded in that library, so it might not be a good thing. The one that comes up the most is direct SMB support. There is the JSOS library, and in Apache itself, it's not supported directly, they have it in a sandbox. So it's still a lot of hard work to get it in. But it's definitely probably the one people want the most. It's the first time when to do that and how we're actually going to do it. It might just be as simple as modifying a bit of current way we actually created the VFS originally, or initially, so that it makes it easier for you to add additional providers in. The other problem is that JSOS is actually LGPL, so you can't just bundle it, so you have to make sure that there is a delineation that anybody who actually wants to use it and redistribute it knows about this issue, so they don't just distribute it along. Okay, gives us a nice little lead on. Now, as I said, this is basically the basic library, so it is useful for you to write Groovy code, but it's very useful when we have a base library, you can start doing other things with it. One of the big things I've actually found a use for it is inside Gradle, because Gradle doesn't really support other protocols. It's very good at what it does, but that doesn't actually exist. And I've successfully applied this as well with clients where we did very, very big Jenkins orchestrations. And standard Jenkins doesn't really scale well with the build steps. And one thing to do is to do a lot of the logic inside Gradle and just make these orchestrations happen with Gradle. And this includes lots of things where we also have to use other specialist plugins from Jenkins. So the one thing I found is, okay, instead of trying to write general Groovy code and try to pull this in, let's make it into a plugin. And that's what I actually done. So there is a basic plugin now available you can get. I still consider this experimental because there's still a lot that can be done with it. But in its current state, you can actually make use of it very easily. And it's the same kind of thing. Basic bootstrap. It's now in as from version 0.5, it's available via JCenter, so you don't have to put anything special in there. So it's only your Gradle script has a JCenter in it. You need to have your class path. And as before, when we did the grapes, you can just add in what you need. And the last other thing is just apply plugin VFS. Now, this is a project extension, so it doesn't come with tasks or anything at the moment. But because it's a project extension, you can just use it. So you can create your own task and put whatever code you want to do from the VFS inside it. And you actually use that because as a project extension, it's actually just another member of the project class or the project object. So you can obviously have said project.vfs, but that looks better. And obviously builder, once again, is part of, as another object or another property of the project class. So everything is a lot simpler there. And builder itself is obviously also a file object. So it just works because it just gets handled. Now, you might actually think, that's nice, but what other things to do? So I haven't done anything else. And the reason for that is it takes a lot of thought of actually getting this right. You already said writing DSLs are not easy. So you don't want to go make a mess inside Gradle and write something that's not really useful. So you want to follow the real, or the same kind of structure the Gradle file. You don't want to do something different. So, things that we could do is there's already things like par trees and zip trees, which follow the file tree kind of basic form inside of Gradle. So one thing to look is that maybe you can create something that's called a VFS tree, which looks the same, but what you then actually put is a bunch of URLs into it, and it puts them together. And it then go looks on that, and then actually you can do work with that, and you can potentially also check whether it's up to date. Whether it's actually possible to do it, I don't know yet. So I played with it, and I haven't given enough thought to it. Just to say, it's not my day job to cut code anymore, so I do this when I'm in between conferences or in between clients, etc. The other thing is to actually create copy and move tasks. The same kind of thing in Gradle. You have the copy task, you have the move task, and you also have them as project extensions. So that is something else to write those as task classes. But then we have to figure out how do we do the input annotations and things like that. What do we actually declare as an input and as an output? So it's actually a question, who in here has actually ever written a Gradle plugin? Okay, super. So you are aware when you write a task extension, you have to do all those kind of things. So there's a lot to think about. And that's one of the reasons I definitely haven't done it. And maybe if some of you guys kind of have a good idea, we can actually play and get it working. It might actually be useful. And that's another thing. So we've done a Gradle plugin now, but potentially this could actually be used somewhere else. I can think of one, but this the kind of things that maybe you think, oh, in Griffin or Grails it might be useful to actually plug it in. The Griffin app might actually want to use it because you might want to write something that actually copy things from remote, etc. Where it's useful in Grails, I don't know, maybe it is. When we did a lot of services a couple of years ago, I would have thought that would have been very, very useful because we had a lot of things where you had to request upload permissions to the server, and it actually gives you a URL, and you have to upload a file. And at the back end of that system, it has to push files ahead again. This would be really useful, but that's in the past, so I don't know if it still would actually work well to do it now, but maybe somebody thinks it might work. So it would be good to hear if somebody can actually write a plugin and think it's useful. The other one where I actually think it really has application is inside Jenkins, because today we have an FTP plugin, FTP copy plugin, an SSH copy plugin, an SMB copy plugin, and they all work slightly different. Yet, what we've seen now, I think it would be very, very useful to have one plugin and you just put the URLs in there which you want to get done, and we can actually get rid of the other plugins. Now, I don't know if who's actually written a Jenkins plugin?
It's terrible.
Ah, right, thank you. Yes, and it's terrible because?
It's just a very, very custom way of thinking about it.
Yeah. And there's a distinct lack of documentation.
And lots of jelly.
Yeah, there's jelly as well, yes, and they've got no gelatin in them. Yes, so I have another friend who's written a couple as well. And he's quite happy. He says, yes, you just have to find a lot of extension point. I said, yes, that's half the work. And he said, and you have to build this with Maven. Ouch. Okay, so. Right, so there is workable. I think actually the end product could be really good. It's the start. So someone who actually knows Jenkins enough to do this would be great. I think it would help. So there's a question. Who wants to write one? Okay. I think so. I actually shot through this. So, there it is again. I think we finished 10 minutes early really on this one. But as I said, it's the last session of the day. You are tired, and I don't want to borrow too much code. I just want to leave things with you. You can go think about this now. And if you think this is a useful DSL, maybe you want to use it. And maybe it did actually make that Apache API a bit more groovier. So if you want to tweet about it, there is Groovy VFS, and you can get hold of me, and obviously it's on GitHub. So any questions?
Have you done anything with VFS and S3?
No. Apparently, the juice, there's something for Amazon. Somebody wrote something for Apache VFS to do that. The only thing so far is it's not easy to get those extra plugins in. So this is something we could do, because what you have to do, by default, Apache VFS stores an XML file inside a jar, which tells it about all of the potential plugins it has. So if you write your own one, it's not in there. The API allows you to give it a different file containing an XML file. Unfortunately, it does take the XML, like all that structure in memory, which is a bit stupid. But if we extend the way we initialize this to actually maybe pass in a separate XML file, then we can easily handle it, I'm sure of that. More questions?
You said that you need to create several VFS objects to make it parallel.
Yes. Well, not parallel, just well, if you want to run, if you cannot reuse the same VFS object between multiple threads unless you put a guard around it. So it's, if you want to use it inside GParse, you'll have to use one VFS per executor.
Have you tried with JSSCH pattern? Because I think I've run into trouble with JSH.
Yeah.
With my friends in the past. Maybe they are correctly.
Okay, I haven't actually. We have tried. We've done this with multiple threads, but I don't know if we actually use SDP. I think where we use SDP, it's always been a sequential nature. So I don't know.
Yeah.
You can try it. Yeah. Yeah, you can try somebody else one.
Yes, I just wanted to ask you, so working with local files, you instantiating a new file. Is the file protocol also supported for URL? If you want to do something locally, like file :
Yes, it's in there.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's what all the original ones show that, so you can just do it.
Okay.
It's just if you have a file object, you can use it right away.
Right.
Okay. Anything else? None? Okay, that means we are done 8 minutes early. Great, thank you very much.